mountainous communities of the Andes have been the backdrop to one of the world's bloodiest guerrilla wars. Squeezed between two opposing sides, the peasants who've lived here for centuries. Historically, they've been neglected by the government in Lima. In the Andean War, they've been victimized by both sides. Their villages have been destroyed, bombed or burned to the ground. Thousands have died, many of them wrongly accused of helping their killers' opponents. Now, with the support and many say the coercion of the army, the peasants have banded into civil defense forces to protect their villages. The main left-wing rebel group fighting the government believes that blood is a necessary part of the revolution. The Shining Path, or Sendero Luminoso, has terrorized Peru for the past 10 years. And unlike other guerrilla movements in the region, its attacks have not just been confined to military or government targets. The Shining Path's great inspiration is Chairman Mao. And the group still believes a Chinese-style revolution is possible in Peru by encircling the cities from the countryside. It's thought that the Shining Path's hardcore supporters number around 10,000. Their funds come from taxation in the regions they control and from trafficking in cocaine. The group's income from drugs is estimated to be as much as $50 million a year. Government after government has failed to meet the threat of the Shining Path. Alberto Fujimori swept to power in presidential elections last year, voted in on the strength of promises to tackle Peru's economic crisis. But political violence plays a big part in the economic equation. The battle against the militants costs Peru nearly $2,000 million a year. One of the Peruvian government's main tactics against the rebels has been to arm the local civilian population. But there's nothing voluntary about these civil defense patrols, the rondas campesinas. Anyone who even hesitates about joining up risks being labeled a subversive. The Peruvian army says that in the Central Andes alone, they've organized more than 20,000 of these civilian fighters. The village militias are expected to police their own communities and check travelers moving through the surrounding countryside. Sometimes they join the military on special operations, but the army admits they're often used as nothing more than human shields, protecting the troops from guerrilla ambushes. It means that now, more than ever, the war is claiming mostly civilian lives. The civil defense fighters receive rudimentary training from military instructors. They're armed only with the most primitive of weapons. The trusted members are given proper rifles. Others have to make do with homemade weapons, the barrels of which often bend after firing 4 or 5 shots. With weapons like these, peasant fighters are expected to stave off attacks by rebels armed with state-of-the-art Kalashnikovs. In some areas, the military authorities are said to have forcibly resettled peasants in supervised refugee camps. These perform a purely strategic function, acting as fortified settlements to deter rebel attacks. Only the youngest children and the elderly are exempt from membership of the defense committees. When they're not tending their crops, the peasant soldiers are on alert. The Ene River Valley. In May this year, the army and civil defense fighters went on the offensive against the Shining Path. Backed up by a helicopter assault, they captured villages along the river, hitting at the heart of the rebels' self-styled liberation zones. Around 8,000 people were freed from rebel captivity. This 13-year-old boy was kidnapped by the Shining Path and lived with them for 2 years. He says he was a political commander to a group of children as young as 8. He now pleads for weapons to fight the rebels. More than 50% of the Peruvian people live in territory under military rule. Most of them are in the highlands of the Andes and make up the section of the population worst hit by the country's economic mess. Their stores are painfully thin, but they're still expected to provide supplies for both sides in the war. The peasants face another deadly threat: disease. Peru suffered a terrible cholera epidemic this year, which killed more than 2,500 people. There's no money for improved sanitation, and the health authorities have predicted another outbreak of the disease within months. Many refugees have given up their traditional homes in the Andes altogether, flocking instead to shanty towns outside the capital, Lima. There are 8 million people living in Lima, 2/3 of them in the dismal surroundings and conditions of the shanty towns. Work is scarce in the city, and for these displaced people there are ever-present feelings of depression and loss of identity brought on by the cultural differences that separate country and city. Many women have been widowed by war or are single mothers, their children often the product of rape. Some are doing what they can to improve life in the shanty towns. Like millions of others in Lima, they survive by forming what's called a common pot, a sort of soup kitchen. It enables them to get official recognition and receive donations of food. The government also gives away medical and health treatment in an effort to neutralize the influence of the Shining Path. But there are growing signs that the rebels are establishing a foothold in the cities. The violence has followed the poor of Peru to the city from the Andes. Deadly evidence came in November this year. 16 people massacred by rebels on a Lima street, the first such mass killing in the Peruvian capital. Some observers fear this could lead to the emergence of death squads, an all too familiar part of the political scene in other Latin American countries. Since 1980, more than 22,000 people have been killed in political violence in Peru. More than 400 people died in October alone. And in a chillingly frank admission recently, a leading Peruvian senator said, "Peru has been living an undeclared war. We have lost too much time to stop it."